We are live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our free webinar today, GMOs 2.0, are they in your food and cosmetics? Today, we're going to be talking about new techniques in genetic engineering, where they're showing up in food, and also personal care products, what to look for, and also how to find safe, natural alternatives. And my name is Stacy Malkin. I'm going to be moderating today. I'm the co-director of US Right to Know, which is a nonprofit public watchdog group that has been investigating the food and agrochemical industries and standing for truth and transparency in our food system. And I'm also very interested in the cosmetics aspect of this topic, as I worked for many years with the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics and also wrote a book about the ugly side of the beauty industry. So I'm really happy to be here with these amazing panelists today who are going to be sharing their wisdom. And these really are some of the leading thinkers in emerging new food technologies and sustainable food systems. So we're going to have a great discussion today. This will be available afterward to watch, so you can tell your friends about it. I also wanted to mention that this webinar is part of the Movement and Emerging Technologies webinar series, which is funded by the European Union as part of the Synergene project. And wanted to also give a shout out to our hosts, Jim Thomas and the ETC group, which have just been truly amazing resources in understanding developments in emerging new technologies and also seed diversity, corporate control in the food system, and other topics that are really crucial to how our food system meets the future. And I think all of us here on this call today, I'm going to introduce our panelists in a moment. We all really share the view that important developments in genetic engineering and the genetic manipulation of our food system should not be left just to researchers in labs or corporations that need to be primarily concerned with increasing profits, but need to be really an open debate, including civil society, that needs much discussion, total transparency so that consumers can make informed choices about what they're buying, eating, putting on our bodies, and also democratic control so that we're sure that new technologies are safe and fit in with a vision of a sustainable food system that's truly good for the planet and for communities. So with that, I'm going to introduce our four speakers today. We have Dana Perls, the Senior Food and Technology Campaigner at Friends of the Earth. Then we'll hear from Dr. Michael Hansen, who's the Senior Scientist at Consumers Union. Dr. Raveen Donald, who's Vice President of Technical Services at Frontier Co-op, and Lisa Stokey, who is the co-founder and Associate Director of Food Democracy Now! And I'll say a little bit more about the speakers before we hear from them. But first up, we're going to hear from Dana Perls, who has spent many years studying synthetic biology in particular and emerging new food technologies. So Dana, welcome. And why don't you start us off today by just telling us about the new developments in genetic engineering. What are GMOs 2.0? Where are they showing up in our food and cosmetics?
Thank you, Stacy. So we've been told many myths for many years about first-generation genetic engineering. But now we have a whole new set of technologies which are rapidly entering the marketplace, and these are driven and patented by biotech companies. GMOs, first generation, have been in our food and some cosmetics for about 20 years, but now things have been changing, and we have a different type of genetic engineering. It's shifted and it's evolved. So in general, it's a merger of engineering and biology, and these new genetic engineering technologies raise a lot of concerns that go beyond first generation genetic engineering. So what is it? This is different from first generation GMOs. So instead of swapping genes from one species to another, such as in previous genetic engineering, synthetic biologists don't need to rely on existing organisms and existing genes anymore, and they may draw from a variety of approaches. These can involve creating new genetic material, such as DNA, in order to reprogram life forms, silence genes, delete genes, add genes. So for example, one way that this might happen in a commercialized application is that a scientist may sit down at something like a DNA processor and write an entirely new genetic code on a computer, print it out, and insert it into an organism like yeast or algae. You then feed this genetically engineered yeast or algae biomass or sugar, such as sugarcane or GMO corn, and this ferments to produce something that it wouldn't naturally ever produce, like artificial vanilla flavoring, stevia, ginseng, sandalwood, a number of different flavors and fragrances and oils. This is all about an engineering process, not a product such as what we have seen in first generation GMOs. So the science is incredibly complex right now, and yet it's already entering the market and the environment. There's no safety assessments right now specific to these new techniques, no regulatory oversight for a very swiftly moving set of technologies that we don't know how to predict or control. So that's essentially what it is. In general, synthetic biologists have their sights set on a number of different ways to use this technology. They have their sights set on plants and insects, animals, microbes, fuels, chemicals. However, what we're going to focus on is specifically where they're entering the marketplace. This is the frontline entry place for these new technologies, food, fragrances, and oils.
Can you tell us a little bit just about some of the specific types of foods that are either already on the market or soon to come?
Yeah, of course. So we're starting to see these enter into the marketplace in the form of whole foods, flavors and fragrances and oils. In terms of the foods, for example, we have GMO apples and potatoes that were made using gene silencing techniques, RNAi, and these are already approved on the market. And we've seen something that we refer to as CRISPR mushrooms as well. Those were approved to be deregulated. We've seen them approved on the market for flavors and fragrances such as vanilla, stevia, saffron, ginseng, patchouli, rose oil, and in terms of oils, we have algal oil, shea butter. We've seen new brands come onto the market called Thrive Oil, a gene-edited canola oil, which is being self-labeled as non-GMO, which is incredibly misleading and false.
Well, I think one of the things overall, one of the biggest concerns is this stuff is being snuck into the market without telling consumers, without being honest about what it is. And we'll talk a little bit more about this with Michael too, but we see foods will be maybe labeled as natural. And we're going to be hearing from Raveen too about how difficult it is for companies to even find out where stuff in the supply chain is coming from. So transparency is a big issue. The fact that most consumers probably will have no idea if new synthetic biology or GMOs are in their food, unless you do particular kinds of due diligence, which we'll talk about with Dana a little bit later. But can you tell us some of the broad concerns about GMOs 2.0 in general?
Sure. So GMOs 2.0 are more risky than the first generation GMOs. There's a greater detail of intervention into the DNA itself. There's a faster speed of creation. We're creating novel organisms and DNA, and these can result in many more unknown consequences, off-target impacts, and socioeconomic impacts. So there's a number of buckets of concerns. Environmental contamination, it's unsustainable for the environment and for farmers, and it increases corporate consolidation. And writ large, Stacey, as you said, there are no regulations. So these technologies are galloping ahead with virtually no regulation or oversight, and no overview to anticipate what the unintended consequences are. And really, before these enter into the market or in the environment, we need to know what the regulations are. We need transparency, we need safety assessments, and we need honesty about the full life cycle analysis. So in general, contamination is one of the biggest concerns. While some types of pollutions can be cleaned up, synthetic biology and new genetic engineered organisms are alive. They self-replicate, they evolve. Once they are in the environment, it may be impossible to recall or clean up. Also, we know that genetically engineered organisms evolve over time, meaning that they may evolve in very unpredictable ways. One of the more common genetically engineered organisms is algae, and we know that algae is not possible to contain. Scientists have been clear that 100% containment is unfeasible. And so when you have something like algae, which is one of the most prolific organisms on the planet, we really need to be cautious and concerned about what happens when genetically engineered algae is released into the environment. What is the contamination? How might it become an invasive species? Really, we are unleashing technologies with very few ideas about the consequences. Sustainability is another real concern. The claims of sustainability for this technology are questionable at best. Most of these synthetic biology organisms, like yeast and algae, require feedstock to live and produce. And these are industrial, chemically intensive, water intensive monocrops like sugarcane or GMO corn. And these are far from sustainable. So really, we need to look holistically at what is an environmentally sustainable. The impacts on small farmers is a huge concern. This technology could impact tens to hundreds of millions of small sustainable farmers across the world, especially in developing countries. Many of these synthetic biology ingredients are intended to replace truly natural plant-based ingredients like vanilla, saffron, cacao, stevia, shea butter, patchouli, and more. And these ingredients are being marketed by genetic engineering companies as natural and sustainable, which means that they will in fact compete with the truly natural and the truly sustainable plant-based ingredients. This could have enormous impacts on small farmers across the world, and economic impacts on countries. And lastly, corporate consolidation is a major concern. In addition to the consolidation that we're seeing with Syngenta and ChemChina, Dow, DuPont, Bayer, Monsanto, we're also seeing the further consolidation of our food system with a relationship to these genetic engineering techniques. We have some bio giants like Intrexon, which own the GMO salmon, the GMO mosquito, the GMO apple company, DNA cloning companies. We're seeing a real consolidation of this whole food system, which is going to have enormous socioeconomic and environmental impacts.
Thank you for that overview, Dana, and that was great, and you really covered a lot of issues. And I wanted to make sure to tell everyone that there's a great resource available, the Synthetic Biology Shopper's Guide that I was fortunate to work on with Dana and also Jim Thomas. It really goes over the broad points that Dana just mentioned. It has some really great, powerful stories of farmers who, as Dana just mentioned, are very concerned about their generations of sustainable farming being impacted by, say, synthetic biology vanilla that companies start using and passing off as natural. So we have real serious questions about sustainability claims about synthetic biology. What are the feedstocks used to make these products? And then, as Dana said, many unknown impacts that really need to be studied, and also the transparency issue. So thank you for all of that, Dana. We're going to go now to Michael Hansen. And Michael has been with Consumers Union, which is the nonprofit arm of Consumer Reports, for over 20 years. And he has a PhD as a biologist and ecologist in integrated pest management, which is, figuring out how to deal with pests without chemical intensive solutions. And he's frequently relied on as an expert source in the media to talk about issues related to food safety and environmental health, including genetic engineering and pesticide use. So Michael, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us from Ithaca today. And I wanted to start out asking you, we've been hearing a lot about new genetic engineering technologies and the hype behind it. There have been lots of stories in the media, especially lately, about CRISPR, the gene editing technology, and how this is supposedly, the thing that will save the food system. There's not been a lot of critical reporting on this, and there also seems to be a big PR campaign coming from the companies to say these aren't GMOs. These are different than GMOs. Some companies are even going so far, as Dana mentioned, as to call them non-GMO, or to say they're natural. So they're really trying to separate these new genetic engineering technologies from the old and say that this is something entirely different. Can you tell us from your perspective about how these are still genetic engineering techniques, still should be covered by transparency laws and oversight? Michael, and you'll have to take yourself off mute.
It seems like we lost Michael for a second.
Did we lose Michael?
Let's try to get him back.
Okay. All right. So how about this? Let's switch up the order, and we're going to go to Raveen Donald. And I'm really excited to have you here with us today, Raveen, to give us the business perspective about how it is to deal with these issues from a company perspective. So I want to tell you a little bit about Raveen. He works for Frontier Co-op, which is the largest organic spice brand in natural foods in the United States. They have a 47% market share, and also #2 in conventional grocery stores. So that really just goes to show the market demand shifting in favor of natural foods. Raveen has a PhD in biology from Northern Arizona University and started his career as a research scientist studying the preservation of the environment using biochemistry and microbes that occur in the environment to clean up man-made contamination, such as acid drainage. So he came to business from a true environmental perspective and has worked for Frontier since 1999 in charge of food safety and quality standards. So Raveen, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to source with such a big and complex supply chain as you've overseen for so many years? What are the issues that you face trying to source truly natural and sustainable ingredients?
Thanks, Stacy. And so, as Stacy mentioned, I'm with Frontier Co-op, and one of the challenges that we face every day, and it's a constant fight, is with the 900 or so materials that we procure from 50 countries and really every continent except Antarctica. It takes a dedicated team to make sure that these GMOs don't enter our supply. And it's much more difficult to do than one would imagine. As Dana had mentioned, these GMOs do enter the supply chain very, very easily. So the amount of that a manufacturer like Frontier has to do is quite substantial. So we undertook an initiative about 5 years ago to rid ourselves of all GMO ingredients and products from our supply. And so with those 900 materials, it was quite a long process. And in fact, when we came to the very end, we had several products that were key to our product lines, and we decided that we would actually, as a company, to make a statement around our support for natural products and non-GMOs in our food supply, we would actually discontinue them. So in as much as it was not perhaps the greatest business decision, we decided to discontinue about $250,000 worth of products because we wanted to keep GMO products out of our supply. So, for us, it's a bit of a personal mission for a lot of us on our management team, because we take our farmers' welfare very seriously. So we tend to commit a lot of time and resources to make sure that they have viable options for the products that we source. So for us, about 95% of the products come directly sourced from these farmers in about 50 countries. And a lot of them are in developing nations. So we find ourselves in positions where we're able to support them in these endeavors. So it really runs, in opposition to a lot of I would say governmental policies in terms of food stability, but at the end of the day, we still think it's the right thing to do. For example, I heard a general from the Department of Defense talk about the importance of GMOs in terms of national security in his mind, because you were cutting off the food supply reliance on third world countries by using these bacteria factories to create these flavors. And obviously, being in a spice company, it's that runs contrary to what we believe in, especially being in a natural foods spice company, being a co-op. It's very incongruent. So for us, this push toward the lack of biodiversity, obviously, as you're getting rid of, cultivars of vanilla or cinnamon or turmeric, you're getting to monocultures, which is something you really don't want in the environment. Secondarily, these individuals that we support end up not having the kind of livelihoods that allows them to bring up their standard of living. Stacy, I had shared, or I should say, Joanna, I had shared a link to one of our supplier efforts that we're working with. If you could share that with the group. At your leisure, you guys can click on that link and get a sense of the kinds of things that companies that are really committed to sources, to maintaining non-GMOs within the supply chain, how important that kind of work is. Because at the end of the day, without these support mechanisms that go over and above just buying the commodities from our sources, these farmers and communities have very little options. So being very holistic in this approach is very critical. So, Stacy had also mentioned the issue on cosmetics. So for us as a natural products company, we also deal in essential oils. Essential oils are, generally speaking, plant extracts, but there's a lot of consolidation going on there as well. So in as much as individual companies can work with farmers and sources, what we're finding is that the processing operations do happen at these very large flavor houses, and they are really, in essence, built to take out the complexity of the supply chain. So what we try is really engage them. We go to some of the large flavor houses and say, listen, guys, we do have these vetiver farmers in Haiti. It's important to cultivate them and process these products in your flavor houses without adding GMOs to the system. So in a lot of ways, you have to be collaborative, or at least in this case, you have to be collaborative so that you can continue to maintain the viability of these farmers and the sources, really, at the end of the day, for the consumers who are dedicated to keeping GMOs out of the system, who are dedicated to really having a holistic lifestyle where natural products are part of their consumption, and knowing for them that they are really fundamentally, by supporting these products and using these products, really supporting communities in terms of, having those individuals have opportunities, and then as well driving biodiversity. So there's a lot of avenues here, and definitely a lot of things that you have to keep your pulse on, put efforts toward, so that you're really delivering what you want to.
That's great. Thank you, Raveen. One of the things that I find most, am I getting a feedback? I don't want to sound echoey. Okay, so one of the things I find most ironic about this is just that the synthetic biology industry is really trying to present this as a sustainability solution. And Dana wrote a whole great article about a meeting she went to in which industry folks specifically talked about how they need to tell stories about sustainability in order to sell these technologies to the public. But a lot of the GMO technologies are really developed specifically for industrialized food systems. Right, and you mentioned that, taking the complexity out of the supply chain, but this is different from what consumers actually want, as more and more people want real natural foods that are produced in ways that are sustainable. So can you tell us a little bit more about the importance of smallholder farmers, maybe some of the folks that you've worked with, who need to be kept in the supply chain for diversity, for their own livelihoods, for the resiliency and localization of agriculture being really what we need to go forward with the sustainable future, especially as we face climate change.
Yeah, and so let me just give you one illustration of a farmer group that we work with. That link that's going to be shared with the moderator will give you another one. That particular link is about the work that we're doing in Vietnam to grow pepper and cinnamon and the support mechanisms they need so that they can be viable. But the example that I want to talk about is turmeric. So we get our organic turmeric from Sri Lanka. And so when we get turmeric from Sri Lanka, it's not just buying the turmeric from a large holding company. We actually work with a co-op farmer group that works with 700 individual farmers to produce this turmeric. So you can imagine the impact it has on 700 farmers, their families, and all of the infrastructure around each of those individuals. So what we did in terms of making sure that we're getting high quality turmeric that has, curcumin content, which is the active constituent in turmeric, above 5%, is to set up a training center in Sri Lanka where we hired scientists from the university, farm experts, and we would bring these farmers in individual groups and train them on good agricultural practices, give them seed stock so that they could really get this supply chain going. So it's definitely more complex. And at the end of the day, like you said, that's really what people want, not just in natural foods. We really believe that everybody wants that if they had a choice. It's really about the knowledge and not understanding that these claims around, food risk really in some ways are scare tactics. They're really very short-term focused. What they're trying to do is look at short-term stability as opposed to long-term sustainability. I think you really have to take a long view on these things. You really don't want the rest of the planet to anguish because you've got some monoculture solution for turmeric and curcumin, as opposed to supporting 700 farmers in one country, 300 farmers in another, and so on and so forth. In our minds, and I really think in most people's minds, that's really the better sustainable way to go, in spite of its complexity and in spite of the efforts that it takes.
Yes, that's beautifully said. Thank you for that. I want to make sure, too, we get a chance to talk about what consumers can do to make sure that they're finding truly natural ingredients in ways that are grown sustainably. So I'm going to move on now to, I think we're still waiting for Michael. I hope he can join us. As he's trying to get back on, I want to also mention that I did a Q&A with Michael Hansen recently, and he laid out his concerns about new GMOs and his view of, as Raveen was just saying, how the industrial applications of these foods are so different from what consumers want. And so his belief is that this is not where the food system is going. It's where some certain companies want it to go because it's easier for them to make profits. But it's a really sort of exciting, dangerous time as new technologies are rolling out. Consumers don't want them, but companies are rushing to use them and build them as sustainability solutions. So we all need to be vigilant and aware. We're going to hear now from Lisa Stokoe, and I'm really excited, Lisa, to hear what you have to say about fragrances in particular. And Lisa has a strong background in food and also in cosmetics. She's the founder and associate director of Food Democracy Now!, which is a very large grassroots community dedicated to building a sustainable food system. And also she has a background in aromatherapy. A mom, really is going to bring us the consumer perspective about why this matters to people, women who are buying and choosing food and cosmetics. So Lisa, welcome. And I see Michael is back. Awesome. We're going to get to you last, Michael. So Lisa, why don't we go first with Lisa and just talk about, tell us about why it's so important to think about natural and sustainable fragrances, which is not something people associate with fragrance often, but you're going to help us see how to think about it. Are you on mute? You are. Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. Can you hear me
Hi,
now?
Lisa. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Stacy. Yeah, I mean, it's, when people think of the world of fragrance, I'll just address that first, maybe, fragrance, when, as you know, probably better than anybody here, Stacy, when you talk about fragrance, lots of times when you see that in a product or a cosmetic, Lots of times it is a synthetic version. Of course, you know, what we're talking about today is, you know, calling it GMOs 2.0 because, of course, that's really what it is. It still is genetic engineering, which is what, you know, of course, Michael will get to here shortly. You know, we really need to be relying more upon, you know, plant-based medicine, in my opinion. And a lot of the times people think that they really are when they see something that's fragrance or whatever. And of course, the problems is that we don't have transparent labeling. And at Food Democracy now, that's something that we've been working on really intensely with all of you individuals here as well over the last several years. Unfortunately, as the DARK Act just recently passed, it was a law that preempted states, for those of you who don't know, preempted states from labeling genetically engineered foods and also these products. So, you know, we really do have, you know, one hand tied behind our back, I guess, if you will, as far as transparency. My deep concern as a mom, as an activist, and as someone who is now starting a company, you know, to educate people and to offer them plant-based medicine with essential oil products, you know, my deep concern is that people use plants, just as I said, for medicine. And plants and essential oils are very complex organisms. They contain hundreds of different, you know, naturally occurring chemical constituents that operate and interact, you know, in our bodies. So, for example, like what we're talking about today, synthetically engineered frankincense, for example. I'll use that as an example because they're doing that now with frankincense, vetiver, as Raveen mentioned, patchouli, rose, and then of course different just individual isolates, if you will, like limonene, for example. They're doing that now with synthetic virology. So these are being grown out in genetically engineered yeasts. Now, as I mentioned, they're unlabeled, so they are not going to have the, when people pick up like a bottle of frankincense oil, it just says frankincense on it. Unfortunately, without proper labeling, we are not going to really know, actually, if it's really the frankincense oil that comes from, you know, the Boswellia tree, or if it's going to be a synthetically engineered version. So, you know, I know people have asked me, you know, how can I know the world of aromatherapy that says genuine and authentic. Genuine and authentic does mean that it needs to be. And unfortunately, here in the US, I'm sorry, everyone's frozen. I hope we're still on. I hope you can hear me. I'm like the only one moving. Okay, I'm still on. Okay, good. You were all frozen for a second. But unfortunately here in the US, the FDA does not do very good, you know, labeling when it comes to, you know, genuine, authentic essential oils. So like Raveen alluded to, it's really important to know what your sourcing is, to ask the right questions, you know, when you're talking with someone who's an aromatherapist or a company or whatever. And as you are using them for medicine for your body and for your family, which they are very effective. There's tons and tons and tons of studies that show how effective, you know, plants are for our health and our wellness. To be sure of your sourcing.
That's great. I think asking lots of questions is going to be on the list of what consumers need to do to really figure out where the ingredients are coming from. So thank you for that, Lisa. I'm gonna maybe get back to when we talk about solutions. I wanna give Michael a chance to tell us what you came to say, Michael, and I won't repeat the introduction, but I just wanna repeat the question that we've heard a lot in the media recently, hyping CRISPR gene editing is the next great solution for our food, and companies really trying to make the point to separate it from GMOs. That was GMOs, this is different. Can you tell us why it's still the same essential techniques and set of concerns around genetic engineering? And you have to unmute, but don't delete when you unmute. Okay. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. I would just point out that whether you're talking about CRISPR or the other gene editing techniques or gene silencing, these are just forms of genetic engineering. Because, for example, with CRISPR, they talk about how exact it is, but the way they have to get the genetic material for the CRISPR into the genome of the algae or into the genome of the plant is you're still inserting it in ways where there can be random insertions, right? So you still often use agrobacterium to get it in there. And so that can cause off-target effects. They talk about how specific CRISPR is, and it cuts just at a specific place in the DNA. But the problem is wherever that little sequence occurs, it will also cut. So that means it can be cutting right where you want it, but in many other parts of the genome as well. And it turns out it isn't exact. So that means it targets a specific sequence, but if there are sequences that are similar to that, they can also be cut. So it can actually cause mutations in and of itself. So this is just another form of genetic engineering. It is an in vitro nucleic acid technology, and that's why there should be required safety assessments for both environmental safety and human safety before these products are allowed on the market. And I will give you one quick example to show that it can cause off-target effects. They're saying CRISPR is so wonderful, and what they did is they engineered T cells, which that's how HIV, the AIDS virus, actually causes problem. It invades T cells and then spreads. So they engineered T cells with CRISPR so that when HIV came in, it would be chopped up. And so this was going to be touted as a new way that they could help to control or cure AIDS. Well, what happened is when they engineered these T cells, in less than 2 weeks, the HIV virus found a way to evolve around this CRISPR defense. And in fact, it used mutations created by CRISPR to evolve around there. So that just shows they don't really understand what this technology is doing, and that's why there still needs to be adequate safety assessments before the products are allowed on the market. There's another potential issue that has to do with labeling. Besides the DARK Act, which might not allow any of the foods to be labeled, there's this problem, at least in the US and the Code of Federal Regulations, the way they define natural flavors is there's this loophole, and it turns out if you there's this long definition, and it includes extracts, for example, of edible yeast, and then there's a clause that says and fermentation products thereof. So that means if you engineer an edible yeast, whatever you produce in that, if it's a flavoring, if it's going to be used as a flavoring, that legally can be defined, can legally be labeled as natural flavoring. And the problem with that is that is very misleading to consumers, and there's no way that consumers can even sue a company for making those claims, because it's actually legal under the Food and Drug Administration. And because of the Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago, it turns out companies can sue each other, but consumers can't. So there is a real problem with this loophole for natural flavoring, because that's what the food industry really wants. They want to be able to put things into foods and to be able to call them natural, or they don't want to have to say that they're genetically engineered. But all these things this is just a new form of genetic engineering, and it should be seen as such. It shouldn't be seen as anything that's that is better or different than the old, the so-called old genetic engineering. And I noticed that many of these companies, what they're often use is they say they're not genetic engineering. They're calling themselves fermentation products, and they're using fermentation technology. So whenever people see that, particularly with the essential oils, or if they ever see that on any kind of label, that should be a tip-off that it's really use of genetic engineering or synthetic biology. And finally, what makes this particularly bad is the market that they're going at with these essential oils and other things is actually the high-end market, the consumers that are trying to avoid genetic engineering or putting themselves forward as being very green and environmental. And they're trying to be very deceitful by not acknowledging the fact that they're using genetic engineering to produce these products.
Right. Thank you for that, Michael. That was a great overview. And I think that's really what the theme that keeps coming through to me. The industry is in a difficult position creating technologies that consumers don't really want. And so they're trying a bunch of marketing techniques to sell them as the next sustainability solution. I want to really make sure to, well, a couple things. I want to make sure we get to what consumers can do, because I know folks have a lot of questions about how can they figure this stuff out when they're at the store shopping. And people can also ask questions at this webinar. If you're on the website, you can type your questions in. And I want to mention a couple of resources. I mentioned that I did a Q&A with Michael, where he really went into more detail about problems in the DARK Act and what we can do to fight against that and make sure these new technologies are considered GMO. You can find that on synbiowatch.org, as well as the Shopper's Guide to Synthetic Biology, which has lots of great information about all the stuff we're talking about today, synbiowatch.org. I want to go back to Lisa now and ask Lisa, what are a few things consumers can do? And busy moms at the store have a hard time figuring this stuff out, but what's your best advice for what consumers can do if they want truly natural, sustainable foods? And you have to unmute.
Sorry, I'm trying to be the responsible muter. Yeah, as far as foods in the marketplace, I'm a mom of 4. My oldest child's 25 years old, and I've been buying organic for my kids ever since then, very faithfully. And, of course, the best thing to look for is organic and also non-GMO certified. Non-GMO Project has said that they will exclude any of these new methods of genetic engineering as far as giving approval for the non-GMO label. So I always tell people to look for organic and non-GMO Project verified. It's important to have both. And I guess that's a longer story that I won't go into of why we really need that, but it is important, and mostly it is because of contamination and how the natural world works. And corn in particular is very subject to contamination, even in organic. So that's why the non-GMO Project exists. So it's important to look for both when you're looking for foods. As far as essential oils go, there's very little that is available, in the marketplace as far as in, grocery stores, and people can actually go shopping for. That is a little bit tricky because the labeling is quite a bit different for that. So that's why it can be a little bit trickier for consumers. I've been, using high quality essential oil products for almost 20 years for my family. And I usually just do a lot of research and look for, the companies and the sources and the aromatherapists that have integrity. So with that, you need to do a little more research.
Okay, great. And a few more things. We do have some questions coming in. Michael wants to remind that if you see words such as fermentation derived or fermentation technology, that probably indicates genetic engineering. And let's see, what labels or brands deliberately avoid Synbio? Lisa just mentioned certified organic and the non-GMO Project verified will be ways to assure that you're not getting GMOs or synthetic biology. And this, I think, is a good question for Dana. Dana, are there brands and companies that we know are using synthetic biology or GMOs 2.0? And you'll have to unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so I just want to reiterate the fact that a lot of these companies are completely non-transparent means that we're still learning about where these products are showing up. We know that there's a product, the Cebus canola oil, which is being falsely labeled as non-GMO, not by the Non-GMO Project Verified. However, it's labeling it itself as non-GMO. We're also seeing a brand called Thrive Oil, which is a culinary cooking oil. We know that these ingredients are entering into products. However, because they are not labeled clearly as genetically engineered, it's hard to know exactly where they're showing up. So that's something that we are researching right now and working hard to find out. And as we learn exactly what brands they're showing up in, we will be advertising those to let you and as many other people know. I think it's important to look for some of those flag terms that Lisa and Michael mentioned. Fermentation derived or clean food is a new one. Bio-based, algal oil, these are powered or derived from nature. These are some very vague terms that raise red flags for me. And it's important, I think, in this guide that we have that you can download or you can order, we go through how to identify some of these products, read through it, share it with your friends, share it with your colleagues. Right now, education is really the key. Make sure to focus on buying organic and non-GMO Project Verified. And also, if you want to, you can go one step further and actually contact the company itself, contact the customer service and ask, are your ingredients genetically engineered? Are your ingredients derived specifically from plants themselves? Plant-based, if they say, is not good enough, then you can say, well, is plant-based algae or is plant-based yeast, or is it coming from the plant itself? When companies call ingredients natural or fermentation derived, really they're using a loophole that Michael mentioned, which is that you are using a fermentation process. You may have engineered the yeast from scratch or engineered it by inserting or changing the genes. You may have added genetically engineered feedstocks to produce something that it would never normally produce. But because you've used a form of a fermentation process, whether it was natural or not, it's a loophole that companies are trying to take advantage of. Really, the term natural is very empty. So I think that it's important to ask companies directly when you can, and until then you really focus on organic and non-GMO and look at the label for those red flags that we've been talking about: fermentation derived and clean food and bio-based, and even algal oil.
Thank you, Dana. I want to just touch on, Lisa pointed out to me that the organic standards it's a bit unclear at the moment about whether they're going to be including synthetic biology or excluding GMOs 2.0. So I want to talk about that for just a minute and just focus the point on the fact that this is confusing in the marketplace for consumers. There are things that people can do that we've talked about here, but it's also really important to think about what we need to do politically to even the playing field, so that companies need to be honest with consumers. And as part of that, people are working really hard to make sure that the organic standards very clearly exclude GMOs 2.0. Lisa, do you want to tell us quickly how people can get involved in that process?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it is unclear. I mean, in my mind, as far as organics go, and I think Michael would probably back this up, and he gave a very good presentation at the last National Organic Standards Board meeting that I attended in DC recently, or last spring, that this really is genetic engineering, and genetic engineering, according to the standards, is excluded from organics. However, it does seem really unclear. So I think it's important that we all make comments to the NOSB, to the National Organic Standards Board. National Organic Standards Board is set up so that it represents actually environmentalists, consumers, producers, retailers, farmers, people like us, as they make recommendations to the National Organic Program, which is housed under the USDA. It's really very important, that we continue to do that. There's some concerns with that there are, because there are so many organic companies now that are owned by multinational companies that don't necessarily have a real vested interest in maintaining organic standards. So, as an activist and a mother, who really relies on organic, I think it's really important that we all, make our voices heard and be a part of that process, and let the NOSB know that we want them to recommend, and that the NOP know and the USDA know that these methods should absolutely be excluded from organics.
Thank you for that, Lisa. I think Michael wants to also say a word about this. And then I have a question for you, Michael, from Dr. Ray Seidler, who's watching. Hi, Ray. But go ahead and say what you wanted to say, and then I'll get to Ray's question.
Yes, I would just point out that there is a proposal before NOSB that a number of us, including Jim and Dana, were in on developing. So that does need to be supported at the next meeting. So people can comment on that, and I think they should support the basic proposal. There is a problem because in an appendix there's a list of technologies that they say are to be determined, and many of those should be excluded. But most of the SynBio techniques are actually listed and would be excluded. So that basic proposal needs to be supported moving forward. Virtually all the text of the language that's in there is actually very good. There was a group of us that worked on that. So people should be actually supporting that proposal, except for the final table that has to be determined, because there's techniques on there such as transposons and cisgenesis and intragenesis that should be excluded. Those actually aren't part of SynBio, but the basic text is actually fine as is. It was worked out, as I said, by a group of very concerned people in the organic community. So that does need to be supported, so people can basically submit comments to NOSB asking that proposal be moved forward.
Okay, well, I want to thank you and everyone on this call for your diligence and the enormous amounts of time that you spend trying to get the right language into proposals, into regulations. This is a really crucial fight right now that our voices be heard about this. And so I just really want to thank everyone for their work toward that. The question from Ray sort of also gets to this, the confusion around regulations, and he wants to know, now I've lost it, which is maybe just as well because it was a little bit technical and might take oh, here it is, okay. Well, I'm gonna ask you to answer this briefly, Michael. This question from Dr. Ray Seidler, he wants to know, when CRISPR is combined with a gene drive mechanism with environmental applications, is such a product regulated? And I think the answer to that is there's so many confusions around regulations right now that are being decided right now, and that's why it's so crucial that political actors such as all of us here listening get involved in these processes. But please tell us your brief answer to that.
Yeah, the brief answer to that is it should be regulated. I think it would come under the EPA regulations, and it should be pointed out that the National Academy of Sciences did put out a report where they explicitly said that this technology is not ready to be used yet in the field. So it shouldn't be, and any use of it would have to be actually go through a regulatory process. And so at this point, again, there should be no field trials. That there are some real basic questions about how effective the technology would actually be out in nature. Because when they've got it to be effective in the lab, part of the problem is these lab populations of Drosophila or other things they're working with are fairly genetically uniform. When you're talking about things out in nature that are far more genetically diverse, it might not really work the way you think it does, and it could actually cause other problems.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, 4 minutes left. I have 2 questions left. The first for Michael, and then I want to go back to Raveen and to clarify some of the things on organic. And you were also wanting to make the point that there are also organic fragrances available. So I want to make sure to clarify that and really get, from your perspective, that organic is better for a lot of different reasons, not just because of the genetic engineering component. So I want to make sure that we talk for a couple of minutes about that. But just another quick answer from Michael. This question is coming from Lucy Sherratt. Can you please describe the technology behind creating the GM apple and potato? And so I believe she's referring to the RNAi. It seems that these products are somewhere between GMOs and GMO 2.0. But can you quickly explain that, and also what some of the concerns are around unintended effects?
Yes, actually, Lucy is correct. What they did with both the apple and the potato is they engineered genetic material is both DNA and RNA. So what they did is they inserted genetic material into the genome of the apple and potato so that it wouldn't create a protein, so that what it would actually create are these little pieces of RNA. And what that does is any gene that has that sequence of RNA is basically shut down. So it's a gene silencing mechanism. And the thing that's ironic is in 1998, when we had the papaya ring spot virus tolerant papaya, that was also a form of RNAi. So this is actually in somewhere in between those two. And the reason that this is a problem is, unlike DNA, these little pieces of RNA, they can actually survive digestion and be taken up in the gut and actually start turning off genes in any organism that eats them. So if that same sequence that's being targeted, and it's a very small number of nucleotide bases, which increases the possibility. So any other gene in, for example, the apple or the potato that has that sequence will be turned off. But it's then also true that anything that eats that apple or potato that is in the food web, right, those would also have their genes potentially turned off. And that could create serious problems. The EPA even held a scientific advisory panel meeting on this, and they all agreed that this does raise new issues that should require further regulation. And this was based on work that was actually done by scientists at the USDA, who unfortunately were retaliated against, and now they're working in the NGO community. So,
well, yeah, so that to me is a stunning example of off-target effects. And yet, even though here we have the government saying we need to be studying this stuff, already we're going to have the RNAi apple possibly next year in stores, and the potato as well. So I want to again mention to everyone that there are great additional resources on symbiowatch.org on all this stuff. And I want to wrap up just 2 minutes going back to Raveen, again with Frontier Co-op, which is the largest organic spice brand in the world. Could you tell us just a few words about why, at the end of the day, choosing organic is important for so many reasons, not just to exclude GMOs and synthetic biology, but for lots of larger questions of sustainability as well, and why your company is so committed to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I get into that, I just want to briefly echo what some of the other speakers have said. You know, while GMOs are excluded from organics, we do think that we need a little bit more clarity. It's amazing how fast this technology is moving. And Michael and Lisa had mentioned the NOSB comments that really makes it very clear, even more clear than it is today. So I just encourage everyone to support that type of effort so that there's no confusion in terms of what organic means. So all that being said, organic is obviously very important for those in the natural products world, simply from the fact that it's really the most holistic standard that we have today that can be widely applied to supply chains all the way from farmers to consumers. You know, it keeps out things like non-GMO, it keeps out things like pesticide, it keeps out things like additives and colorants. So there are lots and lots of components within organic standards that promotes everything from biodiversity to keeping out ingredients that really you don't want in your food. So it's really a holistic model, and so definitely for Frontier, we are strong proponents of supporting organics to the fullest.
Thank you so much, Raveen. Thank you to all of you. I just want to really take a moment to honor our speakers for your wisdom, for your dedication, for constantly educating your communities about these issues. This is a really powerful group. If you enjoyed this webinar, please tell your friends. Please also, they can watch it here. It will remain on the website, and lots of other great info at SynBioWatch.org. You can check out the Shopper's Guide to Synthetic Biology and download it. You can also order bulk copies if you have a store or a community space where you'd like to share them. You can order them just for shipping costs. So SynBioWatch.org for lots of more great information. We need to continue this discussion and more webinars here later. Thank you so much to Joanne for organizing us, to Jim and the ETC group, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Thanks.